Good morning, good morning. My name is Bruce Golding. This is Jamaica Live. Welcome to the program. We have an exciting program today. An important program. We're talking about a subject that I think is critical to our future, to our makeup as a country. So, welcome again, and we look forward to joining with all the guests that we will have today. When I was growing up as a child, and I'm sure that many of you listening to me had a similar experience, I was taught certain things, the do's and the don'ts, how to behave, how to say please and thank you. I was taught don't tell lies. That was a big no-no. I was taught ask for things, don't just take things. Stealing was an even bigger no-no. Something that would attract severe punishment. I was taught to be reverent and respectful to big people. I was taught not to pick a fight with anybody. If someone troubled you, come and report it. These precepts were taught at home by my mother, my father, and in my case, my grandmother, who lived in the home. But they were also reinforced at school by my teachers. They went on like they were my parents, and they were further reinforced at Sunday school. The people in the community also got into the act. You know, if I was on a road in Old Harbour and saw Inspector McLean coming, I would quickly tuck my shirt into my pants, because my shirt was not supposed to be outside of my pants. And if he saw me like that, my parents would hear about it even before I got back home. When I was a youngster, in 10, 11, 12, I used to take the JOS bus to school. We used to call it Jolly Joseph at that time. And when I boarded the bus of course had seats, but it also had some handrails for people who had to stand. And I knew that if a woman or an elderly man was standing, it was my duty to get up out of my seat and offer them that seat. That's what my parents taught me. And if I was entering a building at the same time as a woman, I was to open the door and let her go first. Simple. Straightforward. Almost instinct. So I and many others grew up with a clear sense of what was right and what was wrong, what was good and what was bad. Which, and I want to make this point, which didn't mean that we didn't do wrong things. Sometimes we did a lot of wrong things. I did a whole heap of wrong things. But when you were doing the wrong things, you knew that they were wrong. And you hoped that you could get away with doing it. And if you got caught, you simply accepted the consequences because you knew that they were wrong. You were taking a chance and it didn't work out. You got busted. Things seem to be different today. Kids seem to be growing up without that kind of grounding, without that kind of mooring, without that kind of bearing, without that behavioral framework. The line between what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad, what is acceptable and what is to be deplored, has become blurred. So, why must you say please and thank you? That is old time something. Why must I make the old lady go through the door before me when she just reached her? Why I shouldn't thump the boy in them face and I him diss me? What you say? Where y'all going with? I've seen youngsters do some crazy things, and on some occasions I will stop and ask them, how could you do something like that? And they look at me as if I'm a mental case. Then what's wrong with that? Or they give some weird argument like, everything is everything. Or, so it's set. We agonize every day about the rampant violence, the spate of murders. A man diss you, so you have to draw your knife or your gun. They hardly use knife anymore. Look at the indiscipline on the roads. You stop at a red light obediently because red light means you must stop. And a driver, very often a taxi operator, bore past you and turn crossways in front of you in order to get the green light before anybody else. Sometimes they don't even bother wait for the green light. If the way is clear, them just gone. We have got so bad that if you put on a stage show where admission is free, some people will still scale the fence because they can't bother join the line to enter free. More than 25 years ago, 1994 I think it was, P.J. Patterson, who was Prime Minister at the time, launched a campaign called Values and Attitudes. It was intended to grab hold of our uncouthness, our indiscipline, our rudeness, our intolerance, our selfishness. It sought to address the confusion in our value systems, to restore the demarcation between what is right and what is wrong, and then to propagate it and fertilize it so that it could become the modem that determined how we behave, how we treat others, how we react to everyday situations, how we share this common space in which we live. It was a worthwhile initiative, but it fell victim to cynicism, to public apathy. It was also undermined by political tribalism. Laborites saw it as an attempt to distract from the failings of the government, and they were not prepared to embrace it and get on board. Perhaps in hindsight, and I think PJ would probably agree, its chances of gaining traction would have been better if it had been introduced as a national, bipartisan effort rather than as a government initiative. But such an effort is even more needed today, more urgent today than it was in 1994 when P.J. Patterson made that effort. Last week, I was invited to speak at a function in Mandeville where the Custos of the parish, Custos Garfield Green, has launched a similar program for the parish of Manchester. We hope to have him on the program later on to discuss that particular program. But we need to focus our minds on some questions. What are our values? How do those values determine our attitudes? And how do they manifest themselves in our behavior? We need to ask ourselves the question, has bad behavior, which we see every day, has bad behavior become so ingrained in us that it is now a part of our culture? And we just have to live with it. We just have to hug it up. Because everything must be everything. And if we are to change, if we feel that that is not the way that we should live, and we need to change it, if we are to change, who is to lead that charge? Who are the influencers that must be engaged? In the old days, it was the teachers, the pastors, the justices of the peace, the postmistresses, the people in the community who were the influencers. These were the people that we looked up to. These were the people that we paid attention to. These were the people whose words we were prepared to heed. They were the guardians of our values and attitudes. They were the influencers of our conduct and behavior. But can those people cut it today? Can the teachers and the pastors and the JPs and the postmistresses, are they able to cut it today? Or is it the entertainers, the DJs, the dancehall artists that we must turn to. And what are their values and attitudes? That's what we're focusing on today when we come back. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live, and we're on Bridge 99. We're talking today about Jamaica's values and attitudes crisis, because I believe it is a crisis. And we're going to be talking with some people who we hope will kind of wise us up and point us in the direction in which we need to go. And my first guest, and I'm so happy to have him join us, is retired Bishop of Kingston, the Right Reverend Bishop Robert Thompson, who I must tell you from straight up, we went to school together at Jamaica College, but he sort of went far ahead of me and became one of the pivotal religious leaders in Jamaica. Robert, do I have you on the phone? We're not with him yet. Bishop Thompson.
Yes. My dear, the Honorable Bruce. Wonderful to have you greet me this morning and to join you and your guests on this program.
Thank you so very much, Robert, for joining us. How have you been? Hello?
Despite that, it's really just the signs that telling me that I have health challenges, because physically I feel quite strong, and I'm able to fulfill my daily activities. In retirement, I'm quite busy.
Give thanks, as I know you do every day.
Yes, indeed.
Robert, we're talking today about values and attitude. You remember that P.J. Patterson made an effort back in 1994, that's a long time ago, to kind of summon the country to focus on an area of degradation, an area of deterioration that it impacted so many areas of our national life, and I believe impaired our ability to develop and grow and to achieve the kind of quality of life that I'm sure all of us aspire to. Talk to me now. How do we tackle this problem? Because I believe that you recognize that it is a problem. And I'm sure that in your own ministry you had to confront it and deal with it. How do we try to effect change to the way people behave, their intolerance, their uncouthness, their selfishness? How do we address that?
Well, first I want to commend you for raising it in this public space, Bruce, because it certainly is critical and timely. In fact, it's an urgent subject for us to deal with. You know, we have laws to regulate behavior, and you know, so the laws really are there to enforce, rather not regulate. We have to self-regulate as a people, as a society, and we need to become the village that nurtures and raises everyone. And I think part of the fallout for us as a country is that the position that many persons in the society take is that there should be no no one actually supervising within the society. People should be free to do what they want. And I think that poses a great problem for the society. You know, so you talk about the various leaders within a community. Think of a rural community where the head teacher used to live in the teacher's cottage, the postmistress, the police superintendent or sergeant that was the security leader in the community. All these persons really, they have a voice, and collectively they were the gatekeepers for the society, including, of course, the clergy and respected church members.
Who are the gatekeepers now, or is it that the gate is open?
Well, that is the problem. And I think, to my surprise, I heard someone who I had great respect and will not name that person on a radio program about 4 or 5 years ago saying there should be no gatekeepers. And I think there's a resistance there to have anyone playing that role as a gatekeeper within the society, a gatekeeper to protect the society from the moral fallout.
How did we get here, Robert?
I think there are a number of factors. There are a number of factors. The free for all, everybody sets their own rules and regulations. I am no arbiter. I don't want to preach a sermon, Bruce, but whenever I speak with children, youngsters, about the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, the real issue for Adam and Eve was that they wanted to be their own arbiter of right and wrong. They didn't want to submit, because you know what the serpent said? The serpent said, oh, God knows that if you eat this fruit, your eyes will be open and you'll be like God. Therefore, you will no longer need God. So who are the gatekeepers? I mean, you may not be religious to worship God or anything like that, but there has to be some authority, something outside of yourself that you are accountable to. And so we have allowed our society and the world, generally speaking, to drift in a way whereby you no longer are accountable to anyone but yourself.
Well, I wanted you raised an important point, and I wanted to go there. To what extent is this a Jamaican phenomenon? To what extent is this a third world developing country phenomenon, or to what extent this is a global situation? Because to be honest with you, when I look to see what is happening in the United States today, I don't believe that them have no values and attitudes either.
Sure, you're quite right. I think it's a global phenomenon. Many of our societies in the East have so far been able to postpone it, but it's really just postponing it because they are far more rigid. I mean, people compare us quite often with Singapore, but I mean there are certain behaviors, as I understand it and as I have read, that just would not be tolerated.
Like chewing gum on the street.
Correct. It's you're not your own ruler, and therefore, leadership, benevolent leadership. I don't know, church, the coalition of leaders, and I use that advisedly because I believe every leader, whether that person is a pastor in a church, a prime minister, a commissioner of police, or whatever, every leader has to build a coalition of voices around him or her, where the collective authority can now begin to zero down all and sundry within the society.
To what?
I believe we can pull back on this, but it has to be collaborative and it has to be collective in terms of our approach.
Well, let me raise this aspect with you because you're a theologian. To what extent do values have to have a spiritual underpinning? Or put it another way, let me just put the question to you. An atheist, somebody who doesn't believe in God, what is their framework of values?
Well, it may be an ideology. Once you have a reference point that is in quote beyond or greater than yourself, whether that person is your God, whether that person is your ultimate concern, because you see, if you say, well, all right, the book stops with me and everything is around me and all my efforts, then the crisis comes when those efforts fail to right the wrong. And so as a Christian, I've always felt that the value of the worship of God, for example, is that God stands outside of me and provides the framework that gives me an ultimate orientation in life. The crisis we are experiencing within the society now is that there seems to be an absent, a void of that source, that transcendent source that can orientate our lives.
Well, I'm trying to wrap my head around that because.
Well, you know, yes, you say I don't have.
In other words, what I'm really asking, Robert, is what is it that determines right and wrong? Is it a cultural consensus, or is it from the tablets that Moses exhibited? What is it?
Well, even that was a cultural consensus, you know. I mean, those tablets didn't just emerge out of the air. I mean, that when we read the Bible, that's the impression that we are given. But that emerged out of communities questioning and collaborative engagement with themselves and with the society. So for me as a Christian, I have to be careful how I put forward a discussion or an argument that will exclude others from participating within the value framework of the society. And I want to give you an example, because something I don't think we are fully paying attention to as a society is that, you know, many of the detached youth that roam our streets and create havoc in our lives, what is it that orients them? Because what we assume orients them is not at all. They're not attached to that. In fact, they feel quite alienated from the main actors within the society, and it's part of the challenge that the security forces will have, because they identify the security forces with a system that is not operating in their own interest. And I spent quite a lot of time, in fact, I've written on this matter, of how the established form and order that you and I grew up in, how we begin now to dialogue with others who grew up quite in distant and in isolation of that. They don't have parents that that help them to nurture it. They've never been to Sunday school. The rules that govern their life are not similar to ours. So how do we, as a society, really engage persons dialogically so that they can understand and be part of that?
Well. Tell me. I mean, I'm an animal lover, no?
Mm.
I have 5 dogs. I have an aviary with exotic birds. I have 2 aquariums, and my dogs have learned to live together. They have some quarrels some time ago, but from time to time, but they don't kill each other. My birds seem to live in peace.
Yes.
I don't see them attacking each other. They seem to understand how to share the space that they occupy. My fish are fabulous. They seem to know. They seem to have an understanding of togetherness, of sharing a space, of living together. They don't have the advanced brains that we have. What's wrong with us?
See, they have an example to copy, which is the environment that you provide for them. Because those same dogs, if they grew up in a different environment, they would be warring with one another and so on. And I think that is precisely the point I want to make. I think, you know, if I give a story, when I was at St. Andrew Parish Church for 16 years, the last 12 years or so, I worked with a program with the street boys, precisely to help to re-socialize them, because I didn't assume that the home that they were growing up in could provide the socialization and the socializing technique that would need them to fit within the society. And I give you an example. After service, I used to have early morning services during the week. I saw 2 youngsters coming out of the temple where they were. So I asked them, that's where they've been spending their night. Ran away. One that did not. I took him in my car and said, you take me now to your home. When I took him to the one-bedroom house at the living.
I seem to me have lost Bishop Thompson. The connection was bad. I didn't want to interrupt his presentation to try and make a better connection, but we seem to have lost him. We're going to try and get him back. Yeah, we're trying to see if we can reconnect with Bishop Robert Thompson. One of the things I really wanted to see if I could get him to help us with is what grounds values? What determines values? Is it the community that over time defines what is right, what is wrong, what is acceptable? In primitive communities, I believe they had to do that for their own survival. No? In postmodern civilization, how is that determined? And then what are the influences that we have to take into account? I mentioned before that in the past, values were defined largely by our parents, our teachers, our pastors in church, and so on. But in those days, we didn't have internet. We didn't have social media. We didn't have all these channels on cable. Those are also having an impact on our values. I was watching something over the weekend. My grandkids, some of my grandkids came by the house on Saturday evening, I think it was. And of course, the moment they come in, they switch the channel from, I was CNN and MSNBC and BBC and so on. They switched to some kids channel. And I watched what they were watching. And these were some little animated characters. But they were engaged in violence. I mean, they were attacking each other and destroying each other and bumping into each other and so on. And I just wondered whether, is that something that is infecting the minds of little kids? I mean, the two of them that were there were 4 years old, 4 going 5. And I just wondered what lasting impact that is likely to have on them. I believe we have Bishop Thompson back on the line. Hello?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, we lost you.
Bruce. Yeah, sorry about that.
Yeah, you sound much better now.
Yes, good. Yes, so I was telling the story. Can I continue with that story?
Yeah, sure.
Yes, that's the conclusion of that story is that this young man really had to make room for his mother's lover in the nights. No, I don't think that is unique, or it is probably a common experience that many of our youngsters have. And it speaks really to the lack of support and nurture for the society. I say this because, we may not be able to do much about that. But what we can do as a society is to use the institutions that we have, the churches, the community group, to strengthen these, to fill the gap of nurture and behavioral modification within the society.
Well, let me ask you this, because I'm not getting into any cynicism or any pessimism, but as a pragmatist, is it that a substantial part of the society has become so set in their ways, their behavioral tendencies have become so much a part of their being and their instinct? Is it, Robert, that perhaps if we want to look long term, we need to draw a line in the sand and we need to say, well, look, the 45-year-old taximan who just can't behave himself and is bopping from lane to lane, boring past everybody. It don't make sense to try and change him. It don't make sense to try and change a person who just walk up and down and cuss bad out every day, and the moment anybody talk to him and rail up. Is it that we need to say, well, all right, let us start looking now at our primary and our pre-primary kids to see whether or not we can put them in a new frame of thinking, of values, of attitudes, of behavior, in the hope that 25 years' time the society will be what we would like to see it as, rather than what it is now? Must we draw that line in the sand?
Draw the line, yes, but I think we have to do both things. I don't know the extent to which I could say, well, the 45-year-old taximan won't change. Yes, he gets his traffic tickets and so on, and he probably finds a way of paying someone not to meet the full cost of it and so on. I think the whole matter of enforcement within the society will have to be looked at very carefully. I know the persons who are enforcing the rules come from the same kind of social context that we want to change, and therefore they are reluctant themselves to do it. But I believe that there can be a concerted effort to have regulations and to have them enforced.
But Robert, a society can't exist, can't be run on the basis of punishment and enforcement. It has to have a set of precepts, some beliefs that says, well, this is right and that is wrong, this is good and that is bad. And when we cross the line, we know we have crossed the line because there's a line that we recognize. That line doesn't exist today, Robert.
Uh, I know that's a challenge, but you know, I have lived overseas, and I have seen my fellow Jamaicans go overseas, and they obey the rules and the laws. You know, I was in Boston studying for 2.5 years, and driving around, I never heard a car horn blow until the first time I did it was a Jamaican. But then he eventually realized that, look, it's not the practice. You wait your turn and you obey the rules. So that may be pretty much a far-fetched example. But I think many instances we find that very same Jamaicans here who break the rules and get away with it, when they go and they travel somewhere else, they realize that they can't get away with it. That's the point I really want to make.
Well, let me ask you another question, and I don't want to create any discomfort for you.
Yes.
To what extent has the church fallen down on the job?
Oh, I believe we have in many ways. I think we have rules we have theologically in terms of we speak, and I say this now. I know there are many Christians listening. We speak, and we are largely speaking to ourselves. We are not engaging the culture and the society in a way that can be transformative. I believe we have fallen down on that.
But is it that the society came to the view that the church, people like yourself, are holding them back, are preventing them from doing them own thing and getting on with them life, and you know?
that certainly is part of it. But I think if the church was really to say to the society and to the community, look, you know, God is not there to be over against you. God is really there to embrace and affirm you so that you may grow and be your better self. Rather than preaching to and telling us how bad and how terrible and how sinful we are, tell people to get to a point where they can be transformed. I think that is a message we need to bring to the society, and I don't know how effective we are in doing that.
How do we, before we wrap up, and I'm coming up to the break, but before we wrap up, how do we get a conversation going, a broad national conversation going, and who should moderate that conversation? Because I believe that part of why PJs have failed many years ago is that people just felt that a political leader was not the best person to lead that mission.
Yeah, that is a challenge, because even within the church, you know as well as I do that there are several umbrella groups, and the JCC no longer speaks with one voice on behalf of all the Christian communions.
When is somebody going to put up a tent under which all of you go and gather, Robert?
Well, it can happen, Bruce, if we are prepared to acknowledge that we are different, and that.
But we must also acknowledge that there is one God, and I don't believe that God has a schedule that says, well, at 10 o'clock I'm going to deal with this denomination, and at 11 o'clock I'm dealing with the other.
True. And it is. I'm in the right place now in retirement to give some thought to that. So let me take time out and commit myself to having that conversation with you, whether publicly or privately, over a cup of soup. But I think it's a conversation that I need really to reflect on deeply, and in retirement is a good place to be to do that, because I don't have to look over my shoulder to.
Welcome to the club.
Yes.
Robert, thank you very, very much. We're up on the break. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you.
You're most welcome. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you for moving this discussion. We're going to be continuing it for another hour and a half.
Good.
Thank you so much. We take the break. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. In another 15 or so minutes, we're going to be streaming live through Irish Jam to New York. We're talking about Jamaica's values and attitudes. That's the focus of the discussion today. And we're very pleased now to be joined by Ms Nadeen Spence, who is someone who I'm so happy to have on the program because I'm looking forward to her particular perspective. Nadeen, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much for inviting me, and I'm honored that you would want to have a conversation with me, Mr. Golding.
Tell me now. We're talking about values and attitudes. Mm-hmm. You may be too young to recall the initiative that P.J. Patterson launched.
I'm not too young to recall.
Back in 1994.
Yeah.
Are we in a crisis? Are we on a slippery slope? Or are we simply witnessing a kind of cultural evolution in terms of our behavior and our interrelationship? Which is it?
I would describe, to be honest, you know how I see it? I think we have not yet forged an identity that is ours, where we have worked out what are the things that are critical to us and what are the things we hold dear. So I think perhaps we are at a moment where we need to figure out who we are. And so I think the values and attitudes conversation is important, but not just among the educated or the academic elite, a conversation that is had through the length and breadth of Jamaica. So I don't know if we're at a crisis point. I think the history of our civilization is pretty young for us to look back at these moments, we're almost 60 years, to look back at this moment as the foundation of the beginning of us defining ourselves for ourselves. But I think that we have to seize the moment and have the conversation, or else it's going to happen again.
But Nadeen, explain to me, and I'm going to get very, very basic, and you may even laugh at me. A man who raises goats or raises cows or raises fowls, somehow they seem to be able to establish a framework of behavior, how they relate to each other. They have problems, you know, sometimes they kill off one another. Mm-hmm. But they don't behave like we'd behave. How come?
And that again, I don't think it's, again, that's why I said to you, it's not a conversation to be had by people who we think are educated. I think I think they're doing that because you evolve a way of operating that works for you. And I think so the average person, like my father, who grew up in Kilmarnock, born and raised in Kilmarnock, and who, with his brethren and the men he farmed with, they have a code of ethics. They have a way of operating where, you know, Mr. Golding, when I was growing up on certain Tuesdays, for example, they'd exchange a day where one would go to whose farm and they'd give a day for free. Yes. But they'd go and work for each other as this part of community, of sharing the work and sharing the burden of work. And when time came for... So
Nadeen, where did that part of our culture disappear? Where did it go?
I think we never saw those things as valuably enough to kind of think them through and hold on to, even if not the activity, what that meant.
No, but your father did.
Yeah, but...
Your father did. So what happened to us who came after your father?
Because we tend to think that those things are backward and country, and if you are progressing and if you are evolving, you don't tell your children those things because you want them to be educated and you want them to speak English, and you want them to behave like civilized people, and so those activities apparently don't go along with it. So that's why I said to you, We have to have a conversation about what those
Yeah,
activities
well, let's have the conversation. But you grew up in Kilmarnock?
Yes, I grew up in
All right.
Kilmarnock.
Now, when you were in Kilmarnock,
Mm-hmm.
who were the people who influenced your behavior in the community? Were there influencers there?
Yeah, man, there was the Miss Mirel, the basic school
Teacher?
principal and
Yes.
teacher who was a community
Who else?
stalwart. You know, she taught everybody and she taught everybody's children. There was Aunt Pet, who was the post office mistress.
Yes.
There were the people who taught at the school, the people who were the in the Moravian church, because the Moravian Free Village, who were critical and key, the Monteiths who were critical and key to the emergence of the community. People I grew up hearing my mother.
All
and
right,
my father
all right,
refer
Nadine.
to them.
All right. But if you go to Kilmarnock now, the basic school teacher, the primary school teacher, the postmistress, they're not cutting it anymore.
No, not in the way these people did. No.
The people who are cutting it now are the dancehall artists, no?
Yeah. Not in the way the teachers and the district constable did in my time. No,
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
So how do we, how do we either replace the current influencers, or how do we influence the influencers to do the same thing that the basic school teacher used to do in Kilmarnock in your time? How do we get there?
And that's where I go back to. We have to hold on to the things that are ours and be proud of it, and not always be searching for what we think is the shinier, cleaner, brighter looking thing. That's what we did. We absconded from the thing that was. I have a lecturer at UWI who used to use the word autochthonous, the thing that sprung from amongst us, the thing that was ours. We didn't see that as progress or as good, so we never held on to it. So that's why I think we need to have the conversation about these things and say, okay, what Miss Mirel was about respect and about educating children, about caring for people's children, about caring for her neighbor. And those things are valuable and they are worth holding on to. And we shouldn't want to move away from those things. We should always try to hold on to that. That when you had people who wanted to put their best foot forward, who wanted to work hard and who wanted to be an upstanding person in the community based on certain core values, and at the key of that value system was hard work and respect and regard for the other. That we hold on to those things. We don't value those things anymore. When people moved to Kingston or moved to Mobay, they lost those things because those things were seen as country and fool. So if we found a way to hold on to those things as valuable things and not just things that rural people have as practice because they don't know any better or because they're dark or because they come from back a world, if we could just identify those things that are core to the Jamaican self and the Jamaica that we are proud of, and hold them up and let people see this is who we are, this is what we are,
Nadeen,
this is what makes us who we are.
All right, your experience in radio, we're up on the break. Give me a moment. Let me just take the break and I'll come back to you. Welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're talking values and attitudes today, and we're engaged in a conversation now with Ms Nadeen Spence, who is a social commentator, somebody who has a perspective on these things that I think brings value to the discussion. Nadine, are you back?
Yes, I'm still here.
All right, tell me now, this conversation that you are talking about, who are we? Who are going to be invited to that conversation? Who is going to moderate it? How is that conversation to be conducted?
I think, that's an interesting question. I think it starts with those who recognize that we need to have it. There has to be a kind of community consciousness throughout Jamaica that says we need to have this talk. Perhaps when we started this thing about values and attitude. That is one of the things we should have done, and we should have had it in the churches. We should have had members of parliament and councillors have those conversations, our political leaders, civil society leaders, have those conversations with people who they are engaged with.
But isn't there a large segment of the population that don't see no problem with values and attitudes because everything is everything?
Yeah, there is, and that's why we are where we are overwhelmingly. I think there are more people who figure that what we are about, who we are now, is okay, that, you know, we'll continue to evolve and change, and that's fine. But the truth is that if at the core of you, if at the core of us, we don't know who we are, and we haven't held on to something that is substantively us, then we are always going to be having this conversation. We have to grab onto something, I think, and I think we have to agree that this is something that when it is that our athletes go to run and we are proudest of who we are as Jamaicans, or we are motivated to cry when the anthem is played, it's when we show to the rest of the world that we are little but talawa, that we have this indomitable spirit, that we are humble, that we are respectful, that we know the values of hard work. So I think on a level we get it, but we need to articulate it. So that thing that you are so proud of, when our athletes stand up or when Jamaicans do anything excellently and we say, yes, this is who we are, that thing, that is what it is.
Is this issue, Nadeen, what I'm calling a crisis? But is this issue, is it a Jamaican issue or is it a global tendency? You know, the people in Japan and Austria and New Zealand and Canada and America, are they facing the same kind of issue? And if so, are there any initiatives that have been taken elsewhere that we perhaps need to look at? Or is it something that we just have to look within ourselves to find our solution?
You know, now that you ask it, I think of hearing about the crisis that is in Japan. That I haven't looked at it deeply enough, but I hear that, you know, this issue of people being isolated and of the community being kind of being held at ransom to the new ways of being, to technology and so on, where families and the people who live in them are not practicing the same kind of community values that they had. Or we saw it the other day where the U.S. was struggling as to who they were. Who are we in the first place, and can we go back to that? So I think globally, because of the way things are progressing in terms of technology, and because technology is becoming so individual, meaning I can get my instrument and I can access the world from that instrument.
I mean, when you grew up in Kilmarnock, for example, I mean, you knew where Mas Luther lived, no?
Exactly.
And you know that Miss Sarah is up the road.
Right.
But people now live in apartment complexes.
Right.
And apart from maybe the person who occupied the apartment next to you, they don't know who lived there. There's no community. Right. There's no community there. And if there's no community there, how you gonna have values?
So that's my point. You know, I think what you mentioned, there is a way in which, if we look at how other countries across the world are evolving, we recognize that what they're trying to do is to go back to the simple things. People, if you, in some of the circles that I move, when people talk about, you know, dealing with the stress of social media and the stress of technology and the stress of this new world, what they recommend is how I used to live in Kilmarnock. You know, unplug, disengage, go back, rest, relax, go be one with nature, that kind of conversation. So there's a way in which, when you are engaged in a conversation about a healthier way of living, you are being recommended to this particular way of life that is far simpler, far kinder, has more regard for who your neighbor is and how you treat your neighbor. And if we say, if as a community of people, we agree that is where we have evolved and that is what we value most about us, then I think it's not a conversation that is alien to us. I think it's a conversation that we have not had as a collective, however. And Mr. Golding, we have had the conversation about how the Jamaican state evolved, how the Jamaican nationalism evolved. Was it a middle-class nationalism? Did we have the conversation far enough? And I tell you about my parents. When I really started to study politics and then I studied nationalism and I had the conversation with my father, I realized that when my parents were born, they were subjects of Britain and that they would sing Rule Britannia, and that some of my brothers and sisters were born as subjects of Britain and were really citizens of Jamaica. And you know that, but you can tell me if in the evolving of this Jamaican nation, you think we had that conversation of who we were to become after independence.
No, we didn't. No, we didn't. No, we didn't.
And so to me,
the Constitution was put together because the Constitution ought to be a reflection of your culture, no? And your aspirations, no?
Right.
And the Constitution was basically put together by a small group of people who went to Lancaster in London and got the stamp of approval from the British government. No?
Yeah, right.
That's how it was done.
So
Nadeen, thank you very, very much. I mean, one of the things that I would urge you to do is to develop your thoughts, which you shared with us about the conversation. How that would be structured. Costas Garfield Green in Mandeville, in Manchester, has launched an initiative. But I believe that we need some more thinking to ensure that we get it right, because what PJ tried to do, over 25 years ago, floundered. Well-intentioned though it was. But I think that we need to... I'd love to see some structure put together, a framework for that conversation to see exactly how do we get it going, and get it going in a way that people want to be part of it, rather than people just looking at it with cynicism, which is what we have experienced in the past.
Yeah.
So I'd encourage you to give some thought to that. And perhaps we'll come back to that, and I'm going to invite you back on the program to see if we can move the discussion forward.
All right, I would like to do that. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak with you today.
Thank you so very much. Ms Nadeen Spence, political and social commentator. We're talking values and attitudes today. We're going to move now to someone who I'm sure is also going to bring a useful perspective to the issue. Mr. Lloyd B. Smith, who is the editor-in-chief of the Western Mirror. They call him governor in Montego Bay, but he's also a former member of parliament, somebody I know very well, somebody who is very thoughtful, and someone who, in terms of public commentary, public issues, brings to that kind of engagement of a level of perceptiveness that I've always respected. Lloyd B. Smith, do we have you on the line?
Yes, you do, Bruce, and thank you for those very kind comments.
How are you? How you been? I haven't seen you for a long time.
Indeed, yes. I'm fine. I've been straddling all the various challenges, including COVID, which is at the centerpiece of our...
I hope you're keeping safe. I hope you've been vaccinated.
Yes, twice. I'm fully vaccinated. Looking forward to possibly a booster soon.
Well, I told Christopherson the other day when I heard he was dumping another hundreds of thousands of vaccines.
Yes.
I said to him, I said, before you dump them, why don't you just drop off a case on my yard?
Indeed, yes.
Right? Because I would, if my doctor would allow it, I would take one every week.
Every week, yes, indeed, especially with what's happening in South Africa now. Yes.
Omicron, yes. Lloyd B, we're talking values and attitudes today, and it's a subject on which I know you have commented before.
Yes.
And I'm recalling PJ's initiative back in 1994 that floundered, well-intentioned though it was.
Yes.
But I believe it fell victim to the cynicism and the politics of the time.
Indeed, it did, yes.
But are we in a crisis, Lloyd B, or is it just a normal and natural evolution of human behavior influenced by a whole heap of factors, including technology, we don't have to live as a community anymore. If we have a little cell phone in our hands and we have access to broadband, we can virtually live as a hermit and just love up our cell phone 24 hours a day. Is it just a natural evolution, and are people like you and me simply old fogies who are harking back in nostalgia to the old days where we grew up in a community? I mean, I grew up in Old Harbour, no?
Yes.
And when I was on the street, when I was walking up and down in Old Harbour, if I saw Inspector McLean coming, he ran the police station in Old Harbour, I quickly put my shirt in my pants because my shirt was not supposed to be out of my pants.
Yes.
And if he saw me with my shirt out of my pants, my daddy going to hear about it before I get back home. That's how we grew up.
Yes.
But if you say that to a youngster now of 15 or 16, him look at us as if we're suffering from dementia, no?
Indeed, yes, very much so.
So is it that we are getting over anxious? Is it that we are simply trying to resist the natural evolution of human experience and culture? Or is it that we are on a slippery slope and somebody better rescue us?
Well, I think to some extent there's a certain inevitability about some of the norms that we were accustomed to that have now evolved based on, you quite rightly said, on the technological age and so on. But I do believe at the same time that what we need, especially for a small island state such as ours, where just about everybody knows everybody, we do need to have some checks and balances, and we do need to hark back to some extent to some of those values and attitudes that we cherished growing up and which enabled us in our adult lives to perhaps be decent law-abiding citizens with a level of conscientiousness and civility and so on.
But Lloyd B,
yes. Mm-hmm.
the dancehall artists, who is a big influence out there, because the youngsters, when I hear them tunes, I can't make out the words, but the youngsters seem to be able to memorize the words in no time.
Yes.
The dancehall artists will say to you, but why? Why should we do that?
Well, the fact is that if we do not draw a break, so to speak, we are all going to hurtle over the cliff and end up in an abyss. So I do believe that while we may not be able to save everyone and rehabilitate everyone and inspire everyone out there, I do believe at the same time that there needs to be the necessary interventions to ensure that, notwithstanding all the various things that are happening out there, the influences, the various influencers such as the performing artists and what have you, the social media platforms, I do believe that amidst all of that, we should still have ingrained in our general citizenry some level of appreciation for acceptable values and attitudes.
Well, let me ask you this, because you have had your stint in politics.
Yes.
I've had a longer stint than you. But,
yes.
but very often people seek to lay blame for the deterioration in societal values, seem to lay blame at the feet of the political leaders and the politicians. But who said that the politicians were the persons who used to define those values in the first place? That's one. And two, I had Bishop Robert Thompson on earlier in the program, and I asked him a question, and he gave me a point-blank response. I asked him the question, to what extent has the church fell down on the job? And he said, yes, the church has. Where do we lay the blame, or should we not concern ourselves with blame, with where the blame lies, and simply look to see now who is going to fix it? And if so, who is to lead that fixing? I said earlier in the program, for example, that I believe PJ would, in hindsight, would probably agree with me that the 1994 initiative would have stood a greater chance of success if it had been launched as a national bipartisan effort involving the church, the private sector, both political parties, and so on. Who is to lead this effort now for renewal, for restoration of values, for redefining those values, for trying to see if we can put back the demarcating line between what is right and what is wrong? Because that's the problem. Right and wrong don't have no definition anymore.
Quite so. And in fact, I remember the late Marty Perkins used to bemoan the fact that in today's Jamaica, it's good to be bad, which was told to him by a young female on one of his programs. But to get back to your first question, where politicians are concerned, and you and I would know that very well, it boils down to a matter of trust. And it's going to be very difficult, I think, in our socio-political environment for any politician being the messenger of values and attitudes. Because as politicians, we are all seen as not very trustworthy. We are generals, we are sampai artists. So
who is going to carry the message?
So the message to me, what I would want to say to begin with, though, it is my view that where values and attitudes should begin, and that was where it actually started way back when, is in the home. Now, unfortunately, there has been a tremendous breakdown in family life. And so we have many parents now who are very young and have not sought to inculcate these values and attitudes in their so young children. So it seems to me that civil society would be one of the agents of change. And within the confines of civil society, we would have the church, and of course, most importantly, the education aspect to it, because I'm one of those persons very strong on the whole business of character education. And Mr. Edward Seattle, God bless his soul, did invite me to sit on a committee a long time ago with some very eminent Jamaicans to come up with a character education, which if he had won subsequent election, he would have infused into the education system. So I do believe that it has to involve the schools, the churches, and the wider civil society. They would have to be the vanguards for this to happen.
But Lloyd B, and
Yeah.
I don't want to sound cynical.
Yes.
But let's get back to some basics. When you and I were growing up, I don't know which community you grew up in, but when you and I were growing up, the pastor, the local minister, the teacher, the postmistress, the district constable, these were exemplars, no?
Yes.
These were guardians. But we live in an age today where you pick up your newspaper and you see where pastor is being charged for carnal abuse. You hear stories about teachers that when the children misbehave in school, them reel off a whole of a bad word to the children.
Yeah.
Policemen are now in many instances they're no longer looked upon; they are looked down upon.
Indeed, I'm sure.
So, who are to be the purveyors of this new renaissance of values and beliefs and so on? Because to the extent that these purveyors of the past have vacated that spot and have created a vacuum, that vacuum is now being filled by some people who, when I listen to what they're putting out in terms of their dancehall music and so on, frighten the hell out of me.
Absolutely.
And I worry. I mean, I have 6 grandchildren that are growing up in an age that is completely different from the age that I grew up in. And I will tell you, with all the efforts, and I commend them that my kids are making with them, and my kids are very protective of the children. But I worry as to what kind of citizen they will be when they reach to the age of 20 and 25 and 30, because I don't know what impact all the influences out there will have on them between now and then?
Okay, well, they have to be vaccinated. And I tell you what, some sociologists have posited, Bruce, that well over several generations, certain values and attitudes become ingrained in our DNA, so to speak. And I think this is where we have reached now, because, many of these things that we're talking about that are so wretched and so on have become ingrained in our psyche. So it seems to me that we have to become ruthless. So number one, we have to decide, and I hope I won't be chastised for this. I think we have to decide at some point to write off some amount or some numbers of persons, generational, and begin now to go back to the basic school. Because one of the things we have found is that when the child is that first 6 years or so, first 3 years or so, is when you can begin to vaccinate the child against certain, terrible things out there. And I think this is where we have to go back and start. The emphasis has to be first on early childhood education, so that hopefully generations to come will have successively helped to eradicate what now exists.
So you're drawing a line in the sand?
Yes, I think we have to. Unfortunately, I don't think we can save. When I saw, for example, where this young man, was it Spanish Town, somewhere in St. Catherine, your beloved parish, was killed because out of his good sense, he went to extinguish a neighbor's fire, not knowing that hoodlums had set it ablaze, and they shot him most brutally to death. I mean, when you look at that, this is where we have reached, Bruce. So,
there's a young man, and I told a story when I spoke in Mandeville at Costa Screen's event on Thursday.
Yes.
There's a young man who said to me one day, a long time ago, he said, "Boss man, me a 23-year-old, I mean, me now live to see 30. So I may have 5 youth. So whatever me have to do for look after them youth, me have to do it now." How you talk values and attitudes to somebody like that?
Well, this is the point I'm making, because what we are now faced with is the age-old saying of a hungry man is an angry man. And you do have that aspect to it, the socio-economic aspect, whereby we have a lot of unemployed persons out there, a lot of persons who are not able to provide sufficiently for their respective families. So, as the young man said to you, he's going to do anything and everything to put food on his table. And so that is another side to the reality of how do you rehabilitate the people out there. Because, if we go back to Pavlov's theory, which I suppose you must be familiar with, not that we are saying that human beings are dogs, but remember the Pavlovian theory is that you award the good things done and you punish the bad things. So over a period of time, the dog would respond accordingly. And I think that sort of theory has to apply to our systems of education and character building, because we need to reward more those persons in the society. We need to recognize them more. And we in the media suffer from that deficit, because we in the media tend to highlight the negatives, all these bad things happening out there, when there are so many good things happening out there. And we have to find a way to create a balance, even by using social media to assist us in the process, to show that, because there are still many good people out there, Bruce. I have come across some very honest, decent young men and women in this country, who adhere to principles of common courtesy and so on. All is not totally lost. It's just that we have become overpowered by the mob.
Yeah.
That is the problem,
Yeah. And the community is not as strong as it used to be.
Absolutely.
In terms of asserting the values and the.
Well, a lot of our older people now are scared because they are abused, and and ostracized and even derided when they try to, you see a young man with his trousers at his ankle and you speak to him and him when him done with you with all the cloth at
Lloyd B,
not suffice.
thank you very much. I mean, thank you for joining us and thank you for contributing to this discussion, because it's a discussion, it's a conversation that we need to ramp up.
Yes, absolutely.
I spoke with Bishop Robert Thompson and Nadeen Spence earlier, and they both feel that it's a conversation that we need to engage again. In a serious way, a national conversation, not just among,
It has to be ongoing. It has to be part of the whole question of how we focus on those issues that are relevant to nation building and character building.
Yeah, okay. Thank you so very much, Lloyd B. Hope to see
You're
you soon.
most welcome, and good luck on your program.
Thank you.
All the best.
Thank you very much.
Okay, take care.
We've been talking with Lloyd B. Smith, the editor-in-chief of the Western Mirror in Montego Bay, and a well-known public commentator. We're now linked, I believe, with Harry Jam in New York. Beauregard is still around, or he has disappeared?
I'm still here, sir.
Hey, what up, my friend? How you doing?
I'm doing great, sir. Just coming off of a big holiday weekend, Thanksgiving.
Yes, I know.
So.
I hope you gave a lot of thanks.
Yes, we definitely did, friends and family.
Yeah.
Alike, so a lot of celebration took place. So
how is the weather out there?
Well, we're into the more serious winter weather right now. We had a little snow yesterday, a little dusting of snow. And earlier this afternoon, I even saw some, so I don't know. It looks more serious now going forth into the Christmas season.
Yeah, keep that up there. I don't want none of that down here.
I'll try.
Yeah, but good to hear you. And hail up all the people up there for me.
Yes, definitely.
We're talking values and attitudes today, and we're now going to be joined by the Custos of Manchester, the Honourable Garfield Green, who has taken it upon himself. He's a man who believes that the job of Custos is not just to supervise JPs and to sign up documents and so on, but to really transform the parish for which he's responsible. We'll be talking to him as soon as we come back from the break. Oh, welcome back. It's Jamaica Live. We're on Bridge 99. We're streaming live now, as we have been doing since 1 o'clock to New York through Harry Jam. We're talking values and attitudes today. In my opening comments, I made reference to the initiative that has been launched by the Custos of Manchester, the Honourable Garfield Green. He very graciously invited me to speak at a sensitization session he had in Mandeville last Thursday. He's pursuing a thing called beliefs, values, and attitudes to try to see. The whole intention is to try to transform behavior, try to improve interrelationships. He's in the Custos. He's the Custos of Manchester, no? So he's focusing on Manchester. But we wanted to talk with him today to see, what led to this initiative, and B, how does he see it going? Custos Green, I'm sure I have you online.
Yes, Mr. Golden, I'm on.
How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me, and good afternoon to you and your audience.
Now tell me, P.J. Patterson tried in 1994, that's 27 years ago. It's a kite that never soared, no? So what makes you feel that your initiative is going to fare any better?
Well, I have a desire to serve, and it's one of the things that bothers me. I have a concern.
So did PJ.
Yes, I have a concern, but what has encouraged me up to now is the support that is coming forward from everyone that I speak to about this initiative. The encouragement is there. I've got it from civic leaders within the parish, business leaders, the church, the schools.
But are you preaching to the converted? Are you talking to the people who already have a firm framework of values and attitudes, so that basically are you running the risk of trying to fix what don't need to be fixed?
I wouldn't say that. There are things that we have identified, and these are things that we think they are low-hanging fruits that we think we can pick, right? When I look at the age group that is involved in crime, if we had dealt with them 20 years ago, we would have made a difference. And what you're now looking to do is to see if we can save the next generation that is coming. Our people have very little value, not our people, but some of us have very little value on life, very little value for our nation. We want all of us to be mindful of the importance we can play in the society. We want us to value ourselves and value others and to be patriotic. And I think we can start in the schools, we can start in the homes, we can start in churches to get the message out there. And I'm sure if we save 1 out of 10, that would be good. And one might save another 5.
Well, let me try and pin you down now to some brass tacks and some practicality.
Yes.
If you talk to me about valuing my life, then I'm fully on board. When you start talking to me about value somebody else's life, well, suppose him diss me. If him diss me, then I have to deal with him. How do you get into that head? How do you explain to someone who believes that women and young girls were put on this earth for the enjoyment and satisfaction of men, and therefore, don't tell me nothing about must have respect for woman. Woman that if a man deal with. Right. How you gonna get through that kind of mindset? Because that is very much part of the problem we're trying to focus on, no?
Yes. And I don't foresee it being an easy task. I don't see that. What I think it will require is commitment. And one of the things I can tell you is that I have a set of psychiatrists who are on board, psychologists who will help to get the message out there to deal with people like who you're talking about. Right? So it is going to be a challenge, but we have to be ready for the challenge. We have to prepare ourselves to do it. And that is what I am committing to. And that is what a few persons have committed to working with me with, just to make sure that we stand up to the challenge and nothing can turn us off from going forward and to reaching the people. As you talk about how people might think, I can remember some years ago when, crime was very high in Montego Bay. And at the funeral for one of the dons or the gangster down there, one of his followers was interviewed. And they asked him about his own life. He said, I'm not just me dead and I'm not me get a bashment funeral. When people think like this, it might be hard to change them to think otherwise, to change their way of thinking. But we want to reach people like those.
But take a typical community in Manchester and take the youngsters who are growing up in that community, age 10, 11, 12, 13. Who is exerting the greatest influence on them now? Is it their parents? Is it the teacher at school? Is it the pastor? Or is it the dancehall artist who just cut a new tune?
That's a tough one, but the one that it should be, to me, in my mind, it should be their parents, it should be their home. But it's not all parents have values to pass on to their children. So some look elsewhere for it, right? Or some end up being attached in a wrong, to the wrong group, whether it be the dance hall or maybe somebody who has some negative influence on them, right? But yes, there is a need. I have been in the communities personally. I've been out there. I've talked to many. I've talked to children. I've talked to young adults. I've talked to parents. And some of them feel very hopeless with what is around them, right? And our communities have a great influence on our children.
Well, how do we reinvigorate? How do we repurpose those communities? Because communities now seem to be bereft of leadership. I mean, if you drive into a community now, the teacher no longer cut any dash in there. The pastor not cutting it either. I mean, he will cut it with his congregation, but outside of the church. The district constable is frowned upon. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, if we want to get back to the cradle, if we want to get back to the environment in which that child is born and grows up, then we need to look at how we can fix the engineering of that community. But is that possible at this stage where communities are so fluid? I mean, people move in and out of communities now with a rapidity that didn't exist when I was growing up. The community is now influenced not by local influencers, but you go on cable TV and you're being influenced by programs that you're watching that emanate hundreds and thousands of miles away. How do you anchor a set of values in that kind of framework?
I am so happy you mentioned the district constable, that is frowned upon in the communities. Yes, they are.
He's now seen as a nuisance.
Exactly. And I remember when I was growing up too, the prominent people of society were police officers, the postmistress, the headmasters or headmistresses at schools. They were the ones who we looked up to. We have lost those values, right? We need to get back there. And our police force, we need them also, the police officers, to set the example.
But that sounds like swimming against a rough current. Because the river is going one way and you are telling us that we need to go back up the river.
Yes.
How are we going to do that?
I agree with you. And it is going to be a tough one, but we are going to start from basics. We want to start from basics. When I look at the debauchery, social debauchery in the society, the lawlessness, the level of indiscipline that beset us, something has to be done. And despite having all of this around us, I don't think all hope is lost. I don't think so.
Well, I will give you an A for optimism. And, I wish you well because I was there with you on Thursday.
Yes.
And I commended the initiative, and I believe that, I have no doubt that you're going to make an impact. I have concerns as to whether or not we are going to be able to permeate the mindset of our people, particularly the younger generation, because we're going to be competing with so many other influences, some of them local, some of them global. That poor kid that is growing up today is being bombarded by forces left, right, center. And what you and I are trying to do is to try to see if we can weave our way through all of that confusion to get into that headspace and to say to that headspace, no, don't pay no attention to that, and here is what you ought to be focusing on. It's not going to be an easy task. But I certainly encourage you in terms of the effort that you have launched, and I hope it is going to be successful.
I thank you so very much. One of the things that I've noticed, Mr. Golden, is that when I talk to people in the community, in the absence of their leaders, and not necessarily political leaders, but they're leaders who they do not know. Leaders like myself, leaders like the head of our police force here in the parish, leaders like our judges. People don't know them. People don't feel like they can interact with them. So when they hear of judge, there's a stigma attached to courthouse, you know. So one of the things I want to do is to take the leaders to the people. The people can know their leaders, they can interact with them. And we will be launching a radio program on NCFM, which will be a monthly program.
Well, one of the issues that
Values and Attitude program where people can call in and talk to us, talk to leaders, talk to the youth. The youth can share their views.
One of the issues that you're going to be confronted with is whether or not they recognize those people as leaders. But that's another issue for another discussion. I'm running out of time, and I have to go off now. So thank you very much, because that's great. Thank you for joining me. Welcome back. It's 1:51 p.m. here in Kingston, Jamaica, and I believe also in New York, where we're broadcasting live. We're talking values and attitudes today on Jamaica Live. And we're coming to the end of the program, but we couldn't end the program without getting this contribution from an old schoolmate of mine, but someone who is he's a member of the laity of the Anglican Church. He's a medical practitioner. He's the vice chairman of the National Road Safety Council. I think in that capacity he's perhaps best known publicly. But he's also an enlightened social commentator, Dr. Lucien Jones, and I'm so happy to have him join us on the program. Lucien, do I have you on?
Yes, you have, former Prime Minister.
Yeah, tell me now. We're talking values and attitudes today. You will recall the initiative that PJ launched in 1994.
Right.
It was a flight that didn't take off. We're 27 years later. The need, the urgency perhaps is even greater now than it was 27 years ago. But are we flogging a dead horse, Lucien?
No, by no means.
No, let me go on.
Because
is it a situation where our social environment has changed? I mean, we grew up in communities, no? I knew your father. He and I served in Parliament for a period of time.
Right.
We grew up in communities that had a kind of identity, a kind of character, a kind of homogeneity. That no longer exists today. I mean, communities have become so fluid. People move in and out of communities now in the way that we change clothes. Technology now no longer confines you to the community conversations. Your community is now not just national but global. We're dealing with a whole different kind of engineering. So if that is what we're dealing with, how do we nail down a set of values that we consider to be particularly pertinent and applicable to us, as distinct from the kind of values that may be coming from, United States and United Kingdom and Africa and everywhere. And quite frankly, it seems to be that what we are treating as a crisis here seems to be a global crisis. What do you think?
Exactly. Well, let me say two things at the beginning. You may remember Ian Boyne, famous journalist, among other things. He used that term back then, probably 5 years ago, repeatedly. The atomization of the society. Society which is broken into little parts with no cohesiveness. And that, I think, goes to the heart of what is happening to our country. The second thing is that many years ago, I had the privilege of doing one of the Grace Kennedy lectures, way back, I think, in 1993. And the topic at the time was the Jamaican society, options for renewal. And one of the things I pointed out, and I think a couple of people commented on it, was that the essence of humanity, which separates us from animals, etc., is that we have the ability to make choices. And our choices are colored and framed by the culture in which we live. And culture is a multi-dimensional thing. And one of the things that we need to, if we're ever going to tackle this problem, is that values and attitudes are not taught. It's not didactic. It's not something which is you can be offered in a high school just so, or take a course on. It's something which is caught. And it's caught from your parents in the first place. It is caught within the wider community. Who was it who made a famous comment that it takes a village to raise a child? And it is also caught from the music and, of course, the other influences in our society. So the question is, if we want to change the values and attitudes in our country, and by the way, PJ's initiative took off. It was torpedoed, but it actually rose above ground. Didn't last for too long for several reasons. But it is the most single important thing that we can attack as a nation and come together to try and help our people to make better choices. When you decide that you want to make a duppy, you're making a choice. When you decide that you're going to beat your woman and the whole toxic masculinity thing comes out, you're making a choice. When you decide you're going to beat a child or abuse your own daughter, you're making a choice.
To what extent, Lucien, has liberalism made our problem more? For example, I mean, when I was growing up, when I was at high school and even at university, the government used to have some regulations that banned certain songs from airplay. Mm-hmm. And that was considered to be wrong. You can't do that. That is
overreaching.
You're interfering with people's artistic expression. Mm-hmm. So we now have a situation where anybody can cut any kind of tune and talk any kind of something and encourage people in any kind of direction.
And become unruly.
How do we? How do we contend with that? Because if you or I, if we're ever to get up to suggest now that we need to start restricting expression, people would burn us at the stake, no?
Well, it's a lost cause, Bruce. It's a lost cause because what they absorb from the music is not only on airplay, it's absorbing what is played in the communities. So there's no point here trying to ban music on radio, which is what it is.
Yeah, but I'm going even beyond that.
Right.
To the extent that people now are going to be free to express themselves. How do we we spoke earlier on the program before you joined us, and I spoke with Bishop Thompson, for example, and I spoke with Nadeen Spence. We're talking about we need to get a conversation going. And I asked two questions. Who's going to be engaged in that conversation? Who's going to lead it? Who's going to moderate it? Because I find very often when we do these things, well-intentioned though they are, we're talking to ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So the big question is, how do you disseminate this kind of idea into the full society, which is vast and complex in a modern world, modern democracy? And the whole question of liberalization is an argument that can take us for a long time to discuss, because that kind of liberal thought comes not only from within us, but without. And certainly some of the liberal thoughts which have come out of North America and Europe is playing havoc with the minds of a lot of our young people, whether they know it or not. And of course, the social media phenomenon is something which you have to contend with, which is a real issue. So I believe, certainly, as a Christian, the church has to take a lead. I believe that as one of the major areas where your whole balance and attitudes is formed within the schools, I believe that the teachers, they have to take a lead. I heard you discussing on a program promoted by Custis Green in Manchester, who's taking a lead. The custodians in various parishes have significant influence, They're the representatives of the Governor General, and certainly that's another area that they could explore. whether or not one of the roles and responsibilities of our Governor General is to look at our society, see where it's going wrong, and to make non-political interventions, which he can as a constitutional leader of the country.
Lucien,
yes.
Yeah, like all good things, we have come to an end. We're at the end of the program. But
Yeah.
I'm going to call you back, go engage you again, because I believe that this is a discussion that needs to continue. We need to find a perspective, but we also need to find a pathway to try to get this thing going. So thank you so very much for joining
Not
me
at all. Take care. All is good to hear from you. Good.
We're at the end of the program. It's been Jamaica Live on Bridge 99. Thank you very much for joining me. Thank the Beauregard and that crew in New York. We'll be back here next week, Monday, God's willing, to do it again. God bless you.